Well, I'm back and we're ready to pick up with September 19th, 1777. Now, I want you to make sure I'm going to include a link to a video that I uploaded onto YouTube. And it's the name of the video is Something More at Stake, Saratoga. That's the video that they play at the Visitors Center at Saratoga National Battlefield. I purchased one quite some time ago to show my classrooms from the Visitors Center there, where they have a very nice bookshop and whatnot, if you've been there. And I went ahead and uploaded it onto YouTube so all of you could watch it, because it's a very well done video by the National Park Service, and it really explains in detail what we've been studying the last couple weeks, and especially focusing in on the events at Saratoga. So make sure and watch that. It's definitely worth viewing. So, on September 19th, General Burgoyne, in a desperate move, after suffering those two big defeats at the Battle of Bennington and Fort Stanwix, and also facing a steadily declining army, which had dwindled down to about 8,000 at this point, due to obviously casualties suffered, but also due to desertions, and a lot of his Native American allies were retreating back to where they came from because they could see the writing on the wall, even though Burgoyne couldn't. So he's going to send out 3 columns in an attempt to capture Bemis Heights, the fortifications the Americans had been working on now for weeks. So he sends out General Simon Fraser in the Advance Corps, which is his crack group, General James Hamilton's brigade, and General Rendizzel, some of his regiments, in a 3-prong attack on the American fortifications. The battle took place on a farm known as Freeman's Farm, where the Americans also had quite a few forces stationed there. And in this intense battle that unfolds after the fog lifts that morning, those British forces will be engaged for over 3 hours by Generals Arnold and Enoch Poor and their men, Colonel Daniel Morgan and his riflemen, and Major Henry Dearborn and his light infantry. In this battle, it's a very fiercely fought battle, both in open fields and in the woods. And during this battle, Colonel Morgan's riflemen, who are sharpshooters, act as snipers. They'll climb in the trees surrounding the field, and they'll purposely target British officers who are clearly identified on the battlefield. And during this battle, out of the 580 casualties that the British will suffer, there's at least 30 to 40 of them being officers who were purposely targeted by Morgan's riflemen. Now, after the battle, communications will be sent from Burgoyne's army to General Gates, basically crying foul, saying, "How dare you target officers on purpose like this? That's not a way gentlemen fight a war." And obviously, you can imagine what the Americans' reply to that was. So, they're going to fight until nightfall. What will turn the tide towards nightfall will be the arrival of General Rendizzel's men, who had been along the Hudson and came up and joined the British forces, and will turn the tide on the battlefield itself. The British will hold the field, but they'll suffer almost twice as many casualties in the process, including many of their top officers who were shot by Morgan's riflemen. So, in the end run, it may appear to Burgoyne that he was victorious holding the field, but when you count the casualties, he gained absolutely nothing. The Americans still held Bemis Heights and blocked his southern progress towards Albany. So, really, a victory for the Americans. So, on the very next day, 150 Oneida and Tuscarora Indians will come from the Mohawk Valley to join American forces at Bemis Heights. And they will join the Stockbridge Indians, or commonly known as Mohicans, who were already with the Army from the Connecticut River Valley. And these Native Americans will provide very valuable service as scouts and reconnaissance units and provide a lot of valuable information for the command of the American Army. Now, on September 21st, Burgoyne receives a bit of encouragement, even though, as we'll find out, ends up being false encouragement. General Henry Clinton, who was left behind in New York City in command of some forces after Howe left the city and proceeded to Philadelphia, sends a letter or message up to Burgoyne telling him he's going to send 2,000 British reinforcements up to Albany. So this is a false glimmer of hope, as we'll find out. But Burgoyne then decides to dig in, fortify, and wait for the reinforcements to show up. Now, 2 days later, on September 23rd, Colonel Brown, who had, remember, raided Fort Ty and Mount Independence, stages an attack on the British base on Diamond Island on Lake George. It's an unsuccessful raid, as his men are beaten back, but still this is putting pressure on what British forces still exist down in the Fort Ty, Lake George area, and they're not going anywhere. They won't be coming north or south to reinforce Burgoyne. So it's a very important function that Brown is serving. Now, on October 7th, 1777, after Burgoyne and his men have dug in and entrenched for over 2 weeks now, the Second Battle of Saratoga takes place, the decisive battle, sometimes known as the Battle of Barber's Wheatfield. But it's much more complicated than that, as you'll find out if you don't know. And you'll see by watching the video something more at stake. Now, American forces are now totaling about 13,000 because more and more reinforcements are arriving daily from the entire New England region to join Gates and his army. The British forces now, due to casualties suffered at Freeman's farm and more desertions, are dwindled down to about 7,000. So obviously the Americans have the upper hand. Burgoyne, who is in dire need of supplies, and it's that time of year where wheat can be harvested, sends out a group known as Reconnaissance in Force. They're going out to prod around to see where the Americans are, try to lure them into their redoubts, which they have fortified, that we'll talk about momentarily. And also in the process, he's got men harvesting wheat at Barber's Wheatfield. So, after this happens, they're quickly spotted by the Americans. General Gates starts ordering out detachments of men to engage the British. And as you'll see in the video, and if you didn't know this, and we'll be talking more about this in detail because the very last class we're going to devote to Benedict Arnold. But anyway, what had happened was General Gates, who doesn't like Arnold because he doesn't like Washington, and we'll get into that in more detail in our last class, really downplays Arnold's role at Freeman's farm. Arnold was instrumental at Freeman's farm, and he's the one who really pushed Gates to, pick up the action. Let's let him have it. And because of this horrible report that he sends to the Continental Congress, Arnold is furious. Arnold threatens to resign. Gates says, go right ahead. Here's your orders. Go to Philadelphia if you want. In the meantime, confined him to his tent. So, in this battle, which starts as different groups of American forces, Poor's men, Dearborn's men, Morgan's men, and so forth, enter into the battle, Arnold's in his tent. Arnold hears all this action going on, and that's enough is enough. He bursts out of his tent, mounts his horse, and engages in the battle and leads his men to victory. Even though, technically speaking, he's disobeying orders because Gates had confined him to his tent. Arnold will lead the charge on the Breymann Redoubt. Now, they've built two different redoubts, which are fortresses with cannon and so forth. One is Belcarry's Redoubt, which the men from Barber's Wheatfield successfully retreat to, and the British will be able to hold that redoubt. But the Breymann Redoubt, which is mainly manned by Germans and Canadian militia, will be overrun by the Americans under the brave leadership of General Benedict Arnold. Now, in this heroic battle, which will turn the tide of the entire war, Arnold is wounded again. A bullet goes through his horse, hits his leg, which is the same leg that was wounded up in Quebec. It will kill his horse. His horse will fall over and land on that leg with a bullet in it. That must have felt really good. Now, that's why if you've been to Saratoga, and I'll send you some pictures of this, that's why the famous Boot Monument is at the site of the Breymann Redoubt, quite close to it, at one of the stops at Saratoga. So Arnold, heroic once again. If there were such a thing back in this day and age, that would have been his second Purple Heart, wounded twice in battle. Now, in this battle, which the Americans ultimately win the day, the British are going to lose 900 in casualties, including a gigantic blow to the British Army. General Simon Fraser is killed in battle. The Americans will only lose about 200 men. So, after this second battle of Saratoga, which, occurs at Barber's Wheatfield, Belcarry's Redoubt, and Breymann Redoubt, that's it for Burgoyne. Late in the evening the next day, on October 8th, Burgoyne will begin his retreat north, heading towards the village of Saratoga, which is 8 miles to the north on the Hudson. It'll take a couple days for this retreat as the British are licking their wounds. And finally, on October 10th, General Gates will order his army to pursue Burgoyne. Now, General Gates comes under a lot of criticism because he's not a general that moves with lightning speed, that's for sure. And in fact, his men that didn't like him used to refer to him as, quote, Granny Gates, because he was so slow in reacting to things on the battlefield. And that's part of the animosity between him and Arnold. Arnold was not slow at the draw, so to speak. So, finally, Gates's army, which now is approaching about 17,000 men, surround Burgoyne's army that has dwindled down to about 6,000 or less. And they lay siege to Burgoyne and his army. Now, Burgoyne is waiting still, hoping that General Clinton and his 2,000 reinforcements will arrive from New York City. As far north as Clinton and his reinforcements will make it, by this point anyway, is West Point. Later, they'll make it as far north as Kingston, but that's it. They'll never, ever make it to the Albany area. Now, so Burgoyne is under siege. Negotiations begin on the 14th. Burgoyne submits his own terms for capitulation, which is surrender with terms. Gates initially completely refuses that offer, wants unconditional surrender. Finally, after 2 days of negotiations, Burgoyne and Gates will reach a compromise which will allow Burgoyne's men to lay down their arms and return to England to never fight again, instead of being taken as prisoners of war or whatnot. So, excuse me, on October 17th, 77, the Conventions of Saratoga, which is the peace treaty that ends the battle, will be signed by Burgoyne and Gates. Burgoyne will ceremonially hand over his sword to General Gates, and you'll see that depicted in the video I've been talking about. And that's it for Burgoyne's invasion of the Champlain Valley and the upper Hudson Valley. All of his men, which aren't even quite 6,000 at this point, will lay down their arms, and then from October 18th to November 6th, they will be marched in different groups to their ultimate destination, which is Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they're supposed to all be placed on ships and shipped back to England. And they'll take different routes that I explain there on your handout, with their ultimate destination where they arrive in Cambridge on November 6th. So, that's the decisive victory of Saratoga. And what's so important about it is the Americans finally engaged the British on a European-style battlefield at Saratoga and firmly defeat them. And a lot of, people never thought that was possible, that this ragtag bunch of Americans that call themselves the Continental Army would never, ever defeat a full-force British army on a typical European sort of style of battle. But we proved them wrong. And really, one of the major reasons why we proved them wrong was Benedict Arnold. Let's sort of review a bit. Arnold, first of all, captures Fort Ty in 1775. Then later, after the American debacle in Quebec, builds the first American Navy, as far as we're concerned, here in the Champlain Valley at Skenesborough, engages Carleton and the British Navy against all odds, slows them down for an entire year, which then puts General Burgoyne in command of the invasionary force in 1777, who I'm not sure was the best choice to command this group, as the end proves out. And Arnold then is instrumental in both of the battles at Saratoga. At Freeman's farm, fights very bravely, and then obviously is wounded in battle at the Breymann Redoubt. So you really got to hand it to Arnold and his bravery. And like I said earlier in class, had that bullet hit Arnold in the heart at Breymann's Redoubt, and he would have died in battle, he would have died as one of the greatest heroes of the American Revolution. And we may have had a state named after him. Certainly there'd be all sorts of cities named after him. Now, and what we're going to cover next week, I'm going to talk to you about what happens to Arnold after the Battle of Saratoga and what leads to his great betrayal right here in the state of New York also at West Point. Arnold should have been a highly decorated hero, but the circumstances behind it we'll cover next week. But just to give you an idea of what, the extreme nature of Benedict Arnold today compared to the Benedict Arnold of 1777, the hero, all little American kids, when they hear the name Benedict Arnold, they immediately are taught to think traitor. Very few know about Arnold's heroics before his great betrayal. And to really bring this home to you, I want to ask you this question to wrap it up today. I asked my classes this question. The stigma attached to Benedict Arnold is so intense. Have any of you ever met an American-born male named Benedict? I'll bet you haven't. I know I haven't in my entire life. That's the stigma attached to Benedict Arnold. So, that's it for this week. Good lecturing to you again. As you can tell, I enjoy doing this. I miss being in the classroom. So I'll see everybody on Thursday. Make sure and review all the material I'm going to send you in this week's installment. And have your questions ready. And we'll be talking about these great victories by the Americans on Thursday. So everybody have a great weekend. Be safe. Get your vaccines if you haven't got them already. And take care. Bye now.